The story of Joseph is one of the most compelling and inspiring narratives in the entire Bible. It's a story of dreams, betrayal, suffering, and redemption. A story that shows how faith and divine purpose can turn tragedy into triumph. Joseph's journey from being a favored son to a slave, and from a prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt, stands as a timeless reminder that God's plans are greater than human understanding. Joseph's story begins in the book of Genesis as the beloved son of Jacob, also known as Israel, and his wife Rachel. Jacob had 12 sons, who would eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. But Joseph was special. He was the firstborn of Jacob's beloved Rachel, and he held a unique place in his father's heart. To show his affection, Jacob gave Joseph a richly ornamented robe, often described as a coat of many colors. This gift, however, became a symbol of favoritism, sparking jealousy and resentment among his brothers. Joseph was not just favored by his father, he was also blessed with extraordinary dreams that hinted at his destiny. In one dream, Joseph saw himself and his brothers binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, his sheaf stood upright while the others bowed down to it. In another, he saw the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing before him. When Joseph shared these dreams with his family, his brothers were enraged. "Do you intend to reign over us?" they demanded. Even Jacob was puzzled by his son's visions, though he kept the matter in mind. The tension between Joseph and his brothers grew until it reached a breaking point. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were tending the flocks near Shechem. When they saw him approaching from a distance, wearing his colorful robe, their jealousy boiled over. "Here comes the dreamer," they sneered. "Come, let's kill him and see what becomes of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest, tried to save Joseph by suggesting they throw him into a pit instead of killing him, intending to rescue him later. The others agreed, stripping Joseph of his robe and casting him into a dry cistern. As they sat to eat, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders passed by on their way to Egypt. Judah, another brother, proposed selling Joseph instead of leaving him to die. "What will we gain if we kill our brother?" he reasoned. The brothers agreed, and for 20 pieces of silver, they sold Joseph to the traders, who took him as a slave to Egypt. To conceal their crime, the brothers dipped Joseph's robe in goat's blood and brought it to their father. When Jacob saw the blood-stained garment, he was overcome with grief, believing that his beloved son had been devoured by a wild animal. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for many days, refusing to be comforted. Meanwhile, Joseph's journey in Egypt began with hardship. He was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Despite his status as a slave, Joseph quickly gained favor because the Lord was with him. Potiphar noticed that everything Joseph touched prospered, and soon placed him in charge of his entire household. Joseph managed Potiphar's affairs with such integrity that his master trusted him completely. But just as Joseph's life seemed to be improving, temptation struck. Potiphar's wife took a liking to him and repeatedly tried to seduce him. Joseph, however, refused her advances, saying, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" One day, when no one else was in the house, she grabbed his cloak and begged him to lie with her. Joseph fled, leaving his cloak behind. Enraged and humiliated, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of attempting to assault her. Potiphar, furious over the accusation, had Joseph thrown into prison. It seemed as if Joseph's life had gone from bad to worse, from the favored son to a slave, and now a prisoner. But even in the darkness of the prison, God's presence never left him. The warden quickly recognized Joseph's wisdom and trustworthiness and placed him in charge of all the prisoners. Everything Joseph oversaw flourished because God's favor was upon him. While in prison, Joseph met two of Pharaoh's servants, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, who had offended their master. Both men had troubling dreams, and Joseph noticed their distress. "Do not interpretations belong to God?" he asked. "Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer explained that in his dream he saw a vine with 3 branches that blossomed and produced grapes, which he pressed into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph interpreted it to mean that in 3 days the cupbearer would be restored to his position. Encouraged, the baker shared his dream, in which he carried 3 baskets of bread on his head, and birds ate from them. Joseph, guided by God, revealed that the baker would be executed in 3 days. Both interpretations came true. Before the cupbearer was released, Joseph asked him to remember him and mention his case to Pharaoh. But once free, the cupbearer forgot about Joseph completely. 2 long years passed. Then one night, Pharaoh himself had 2 disturbing dreams. In the first, 7 fat, healthy cows were devoured by 7 thin, ugly cows. In the second, 7 plump ears of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, scorched ones. None of Pharaoh's magicians or wise men could explain the dreams. At last, the cupbearer remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about the Hebrew prisoner who had correctly interpreted his dream. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph. After shaving and changing clothes, Joseph stood before the most powerful ruler in Egypt. Pharaoh said, "I have had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard that when you hear a dream, you can explain it." Joseph humbly replied, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Pharaoh recounted his dreams, and Joseph, through divine wisdom, explained their meaning. The 2 dreams were one and the same. Egypt would experience 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to store surplus grain during the good years to prepare for the famine. Pharaoh was so impressed by Joseph's insight and discernment that he declared, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh appointed Joseph as second in command over all Egypt, placing his signet ring on Joseph's hand and dressing him in fine linen. At just 30 years old, Joseph went from prisoner to prince. He oversaw the collection of grain during the 7 plentiful years, storing it in great quantities across the land. When the famine struck, it spread far beyond Egypt's borders, reaching even to Canaan, where Joseph's family lived. Hearing that Egypt had grain, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to buy food, but kept his youngest, Benjamin, at home. When they arrived, they bowed before Joseph, not recognizing their long-lost brother, who now stood before them in royal attire. Joseph immediately recognized them, and in that moment, the dreams of his youth were fulfilled. Rather than revealing himself, Joseph tested his brothers to see if they had changed. He accused them of being spies and demanded that they bring Benjamin to prove their honesty. The brothers reluctantly agreed and returned home to convince Jacob, who was heartbroken at the thought of losing another son. Eventually, he allowed Benjamin to go. When the brothers returned with Benjamin, Joseph was deeply moved upon seeing him. Still concealing his identity, he hosted them for a feast, but planted his silver cup in Benjamin's sack as they departed. When the cup was discovered, Joseph declared that Benjamin must remain as his slave. Desperate, Judah stepped forward and offered himself in Benjamin's place, saying that their father would die of grief if Benjamin did not return. That act of selflessness broke Joseph's heart. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, he sent everyone else out of the room and wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him. "I am Joseph," he cried. "Is my father still alive?" The brothers were stunned and terrified, remembering what they had done to him. But Joseph comforted them, saying, "Do not be afraid. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives." Joseph embraced his brothers and wept with them. He sent word to Jacob, inviting the entire family to settle in Egypt, where they would be provided for during the remaining years of famine. When Jacob heard that Joseph was alive, his heart nearly stopped from shock and joy. He set out for Egypt, and when father and son finally met again, after decades apart, they embraced and wept for a long time. The story of Joseph is one of the most powerful examples of divine providence in all of Scripture. Through betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment, Joseph never lost faith. His life teaches that even when everything seems to fall apart, God's plan is still unfolding. Joseph's journey from the pit to the palace shows that pain and hardship often prepare us for greater purpose. In the end, Joseph's story is not just about dreams, it's about destiny. It reminds us that no matter where we find ourselves, God can use even the darkest moments of our lives to bring light, restoration, and blessing, not just for us, but for others as well.